It is not a moral issue, it is not religion, it is philosophy, and above all, it is self-control. The Stoics, more than 2,000 years ago, already warned about the dangers of living at the mercy of impulses. They knew that pleasure, if it is not under control, can become an invisible chain that drags you far from your purpose. And I am not speaking only of sex as a physical act, but of all the mental and emotional energy that revolves around desire. In our era, where overexposure is constant and temptations are one click away, this Stoic warning is more relevant than ever. We have normalized letting our instincts decide for us, and we call it freedom, when in reality it is dependence. Today I am not going to talk to you about prohibitions or moral judgments. I am going to talk to you about power. The power to decide when, how, and why. The power for your actions to answer to your will and not to a passing urge. Because when you learn to master your impulses, you do not only take control of your intimate life, you take control of your energy, your focus, and your time. And that, for the Stoics, was one of the purest forms of freedom. Ignoring control over your impulses has a cost, and you do not always notice it right away. Sometimes it begins with something as simple as accepting a date, just because desire pushes you, even though deep down you do not want to. Or maintaining a relationship you know does not suit you, but which you do not leave because the physical attraction is too strong. This pattern repeats again and again, and without realizing it, you find yourself trapped in toxic relationships that are sustained only by the physical. Relationships in which communication, respect, and mutual growth are absent, but chemistry becomes the excuse to continue. And it is not only an emotional matter. Lack of control also drains your energy, your focus, and your mental clarity. After an empty encounter, you may feel confused, unmotivated, even guilty. It is like eating junk food. It satisfies an immediate hunger, but afterward it leaves a feeling of emptiness and heaviness. The emotional dependence tied to desire is one of the hardest chains to see because it is disguised as pleasure. You think you are choosing, but in reality you are reacting, and each automatic reaction erodes your capacity to decide consciously. The Stoics used a very clear metaphor: a horse running without a rider. The animal has strength, energy, speed, but without direction, that same power can carry it to a cliff. Your impulses are that horse. The difference between reaching your destination or falling depends on whether you are holding the reins or have let them go. Stoic context: the art of self-mastery. In ancient Greece, there was a central concept for a virtuous life: Enkrateia. The word, which can be translated as self-mastery or control over oneself, was not simply one more quality. It was the foundation upon which character was built. For Greek philosophers, and especially for the Stoics, whoever did not have mastery over his desires was condemned to be a slave, even if he wore no chains. Epictetus put it plainly: no one is free who is not master of himself. For him, pleasures were not an enemy, but a training ground. The aim was not to flee from them, but to make sure they never became masters of your will. Seneca, for his part, wrote letters warning about the risk of letting the constant pursuit of pleasure crowd out what truly matters. Fleeting pleasures are the most costly. We buy minutes of satisfaction with years of unrest. This view is far from what many interpret as repression. Repression is forcing yourself to deny something you desire while feeling guilty for desiring it. Conscious self-control is different. It is understanding desire, analyzing it, and freely deciding whether to act or not. The difference is enormous. One is born of fear and guilt, the other of knowledge and inner freedom. For the Stoics, sex and other pleasures were a natural part of life, but they could not become the axis of existence. They practiced what today we would call strategic moderation. enjoying when it is appropriate, abstaining when it is best for their mind and their purpose. If we bring this philosophy into the modern world, the challenge multiplies. We live in an age where sexual overexposure is constant. We open social networks and find suggestive content. Series and films use explicit scenes to attract audiences. Advertising sells products by associating them with physical desire. This creates an environment where the stimulus is permanent, and with it, the difficulty of keeping the mind focused. Our brain, designed to seek rewards, gets used to immediate gratification. The more stimulus we receive, the harder it becomes to tolerate calm, waiting, and the absence of novelty. And there lies the problem. Without self-mastery, this excess of stimuli not only steals time, but fragments attention, erodes discipline, and leaves us more vulnerable to impulsive decisions. Stoicism offers a clear antidote: to regain control through self-observation and the practice of moderation. It is not about living in fear of pleasure, but about choosing it wisely in a way that adds to your life instead of subtracting from it. Enkrateia does not mean always saying no. It means that when you say yes, it is because you have decided it, not because an impulse, a habit, or an image on a screen has pushed you to it. That is the true power the Stoics sought, and the same one we need today more than ever. Practice 1. Recognize the cost of impulse. The first step toward control is to see clearly when you do not have it. It seems obvious, but many times we live on autopilot, reacting to sensations and desires without stopping to analyze where they come from or where they lead us. Physical desire, like any impulse, can be so immediate and convincing that it persuades us we need it now, although hours later we discover it was not so. The Stoics had a very powerful mental habit: observe the emotion before acting. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "When you feel that something is dragging you, stop and ask yourself whether that something deserves that you hand over your soul to it." This pause, even if only for a few seconds, marks the difference between being a slave to impulse or master of your decision. Self-analysis as a mirror. To recognize whether you are deciding from desire or from a real purpose, you must learn to examine the context and your motivations. Ask yourself, does this action fit my values and my long-term goals? Or is it simply a response to a stimulus that appeared minutes ago? If I wait a few hours or a day, will I still want the same thing? These questions are like a filter that reveals when a decision is born of purpose, and when it is only the reflection of a passing impulse. Practical exercise: the Sensations Journal. A simple yet transformative tool is to write down, immediately after each intimate encounter, how you truly feel. Without censorship, without judging yourself, just describing your emotional, mental, and physical state. Do you feel at peace, motivated, satisfied? Or do you notice emptiness, tiredness, even regret? After a few weeks rereading your notes, you will start to see patterns. You may discover that many times desire led you into situations that added nothing to your life. That awareness is the first step toward change. The invisible price of impulse. Sexual energy, when poorly managed, does not affect only the intimate plane. It impacts your concentration, your mood, and your mental clarity. There are people who, after spending that energy impulsively, feel too drained to work, study, or create. It is as if you had used up all your fuel on a short trip to nowhere. Imagine you have a limited amount of energy each day. Every time you act driven by an unexamined impulse, you are spending part of that resource on something that probably does not bring you closer to your goals. And like any expense, if it is repeated every day, it ends up leaving you in the red. The Stoics saw this energy as something sacred, not out of morality, but because they understood it was a vital engine. Seneca said, the man who lives dominated by his desires is always tired even when he rests. And that fatigue is not physical, it is mental. When your mind is constantly stimulated, it loses the ability to focus and to keep calm. The key, honesty with yourself. Recognizing the cost of impulse is not about feeling guilt, but about being brutally honest with yourself. Admitting that many times you did not choose, but reacted. That it was not you who took the reins, but the impulse that steered the path. This level of honesty can be uncomfortable at first, but it is precisely that discomfort that awakens awareness. And once you are aware, you have the chance to change. Because you cannot control what you cannot see. And this exercise forces you to see clearly. Remember, the aim of this practice is not to eliminate desire, but to bring it under your command, so that when you act, it is because you have decided from a place of control and not of need. That is the difference between an impulse that enslaves you and a desire you can enjoy with freedom. Practice 2. Revalue the bond. In a society that constantly mixes physical attraction with real compatibility, it is easy to confuse a momentary connection with a deep bond. But the Stoics distinguished very well between physical contact and true integral connection. The latter also includes the emotional, the intellectual, and the spiritual. Physical connection is immediate, intense, even addictive. It feeds on instinct, chemistry, novelty. But it is like a bonfire lit with paper. It blazes quickly and goes out just as quickly if there is nothing more to sustain it. Integral connection, by contrast, is like a fire kept alive by solid logs. Meaningful conversation, mutual respect, shared values, and a genuine interest in the other's well-being. The question that changes everything. Before having relations, ask yourself, does this person bring real value to my life or only momentary pleasure? If the answer is only pleasure, it is not that it is forbidden. But you must be aware of the kind of exchange you are making, because a moment of physical satisfaction does not always make up for the emotional cost or the energy invested in someone who does not add to your life. Here is where Stoicism becomes tremendously practical. It is not about living in abstinence, but about being intentional. Let what you do be a choice aligned with your principles and not an automatic reaction. A lesson from Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, describes physical intimacy as a natural act, comparable to eating or sleeping. He neither idealizes it nor demonizes it. He sees it as a biological function that, like any other, can be lived in a healthy or a destructive way. What gave it value was not the act itself, but the context, with whom you share it, what meaning it has, and whether it contributes to your life and to the other person's. In other words, for Marcus Aurelius, intimacy was not an end in itself, but a means that could strengthen a bond or wear it down, depending on how it was lived. And this is a radical shift in perspective. It ceases to be a goal to chase and becomes a natural consequence of a broader connection. Practical exercise, the value filter. For 1 week, every time you feel desire for someone, instead of acting immediately, analyze what that person represents in your life. Ask yourself, could we talk for hours without getting bored? Do I feel emotionally safe with this person? Do we share values or compatible lifestyles? And does this connection inspire me to be better? Or does it distract me from what I want to achieve? It is possible that by applying this filter, many of your potential interactions will shrink drastically. And that is not bad. It means you are fine-tuning your radar, reserving your energy for connections that truly matter. The impact on your discipline. When you prioritize integral connection over the purely physical, you naturally reduce distractions, emotional wear, and the risk of superficial relationships that end in frustration. This frees time and mental space to focus on your projects, your personal development, and your goals. And paradoxically, the relationships that do pass this filter tend to be more intense and satisfying because they are not sustained only by desire, but by a genuine and mutual interest. Revaluing the bond is ultimately an act of self-respect. It is telling your desire not everything you want is what you need, and not everything you can have is good for you. That is the kind of self-mastery the Stoics considered one of the highest virtues. Practice 3. Cultivate creative energy. The Stoics, like many other philosophical and spiritual traditions, understood that sexual energy is not just a physical impulse. It is a form of vital energy. And like any energy, it can disperse quickly, or be channeled into something that builds. When it is lived without control, that energy is spent on momentary gratifications that leave little or no long-term benefit. But when it is consciously redirected, it becomes fuel for creativity, productivity, and personal development. From desire to action. Think of sexual energy like the water pressure in a hose. If you let it out without direction, it scatters and loses force. But if you channel it, that same pressure can turn a mill or feed an irrigation system. In your life, that mill can be a project, a habit, a physical or mental change that requires focus and discipline. The Stoics spoke of oikiosis, living in accord with your nature and your purpose, and they understood that every impulse should align with that aim. If an action did not bring you closer to your purpose, it simply did not deserve your energy. Examples of practical channeling. When you feel a spike of desire or restlessness, instead of acting automatically, direct it into an activity that demands intensity and focus. Sport, running, weight training, practicing martial arts. Physical exercise not only spends energy but also releases endorphins, stabilizing your mood. Writing, jotting down ideas, planning projects, keeping a journal. This turns mental energy into clarity and direction. Study or learning, immersing yourself in a topic you are passionate about, learning a new skill. Here, the same intensity that once went to desire becomes curiosity and concentration. Art and creativity, painting, composing music, designing. Creative and sexual energy have similar roots, the need to express and create something new. An illustrative story. Imagine Daniel, a young man who complained of feeling constantly tired and unmotivated. His routine was full of distractions, social networks, series, and impulsive encounters that left him with nothing more than a momentary rush followed by apathy. One day he decided to try an experiment. For a month, every time he felt an impulse, instead of giving into it, he would channel it into one of his pending goals. If he felt like seeking distraction, he went out running. If he felt restless, he wrote about his business ideas. If he could not sleep, he read books on philosophy and personal development. After those weeks, Daniel noticed something unexpected. His mind was clearer, his body stronger, and his projects more advanced than ever. The same energy that before was lost in activities that brought him nothing was now building something tangible. Why it works. Desire generates dopamine, the same substance that motivates us to seek rewards. When you redirect it to productive activities, you train your brain to associate that motivation with real achievements, not just with fleeting pleasure. This creates a virtuous circle. Each achievement reinforces your motivation, and each motivation drives you toward new achievements. Stoic key: intention and direction. For the Stoics, the value of an action lay in its intention and in its contribution to virtue. If something did not bring you closer to your best self, it did not deserve your energy. Cultivating creative energy is exactly that. taking a natural impulse and putting it at the service of your purpose, instead of letting it be wasted on what leaves no trace. Practice 4. Minimalism in intimate relationships. In a world where intimacy has become a fast consumption product, stimulated by social networks, dating apps, and a constant barrage of sexual content, the idea of having fewer experiences but more meaningful ones sounds almost countercultural. However, it is one of the most liberating practices you can adopt if you seek mental clarity, emotional stability, and purpose. The Stoics understood that any excess, even of something pleasant, ends up eroding pleasure itself. Epictetus warned that what gives us satisfaction today can become a burden tomorrow if we pursue it without measure. And this applies perfectly to intimate life. Overstimulation not only exhausts your physical energy, it also trains your mind to need ever more stimulus to feel the same satisfaction. Less, but better. Minimalism in intimate relationships does not mean repression or rejection of pleasure, but conscious selection. It is about prioritizing quality over quantity, choosing experiences that bring emotional value, connection, and growth, instead of accumulating encounters that only fill the moment and empty the day after. When you have fewer experiences but more meaningful ones, each one acquires emotional weight and a lasting memory instead of being diluted in a repetitive routine. The danger of overstimulation. The human brain operates with a reward system that adapts quickly. If you are constantly exposed to sexual stimuli, whether in real or virtual interactions, your threshold for satisfaction rises. What used to be exciting becomes normal, and what is normal begins to seem boring. This phenomenon, known as hedonic tolerance, is one of the reasons many people feel chronic dissatisfaction, even having more experiences than they ever imagined. The Stoics propose the opposite path. Train desire so it can intensely enjoy the little, instead of needing much to feel anything. 30-day exercise. A powerful practice to reevaluate your priorities is to commit to 30 days without sexual relations or deliberate sexual stimulation. This period is not a punishment but a reset. It serves to observe how your physical and mental energy change. Detect how many of your decisions were guided by desire and not by a real purpose. Rediscover other sources of satisfaction. Reading, exercise, meditation, creation. During those 30 days, you can keep a daily log where you note your energy levels, your mood, and the temptations that appear. At the end of the month, you will have a clear map of how moderation affects your life, and you will be able to decide consciously how you want to live your sexuality. The unexpected benefit, mental clarity. Many people who have done this kind of fast report a notable improvement in their focus, their creative capacity, and their discipline. This happens because the mind is no longer constantly busy seeking the next stimulus and begins to focus on projects, goals, and relationships with greater depth. In Stoic terms, it is like regaining control of your ship. Before you were at the mercy of the currents of desire, now you decide where you sail, the power to choose, not to need. The goal of intimate minimalism is not to move away from pleasure, but to free yourself from dependence. To be able to enjoy a relationship when you choose it, not when your impulse demands it. That is the true freedom the Stoics sought, the ability to act from reason and not from need. Practice 5. Redefine pleasure. In Stoicism, pleasure was never seen as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a servant that must be under the command of reason. The problem is not pleasure itself, but the slavery that arises when we depend on it to feel good. Epictetus summed it up in a sentence we should engrave on our minds. He is not free who has no mastery over himself. If you reflect on this, you will realize that most of the conflicts pleasure generates come from putting it in the driver's seat. When we let it take control, our decisions become reactive. We do whatever it takes to feel it, and Once we get it, we go back to chasing it. Pleasure as ally, not as master. Redefining pleasure is changing its place in your life. It is not the central objective, but a natural consequence of living aligned with your values and principles. The Stoics believed that when you act with virtue, pleasure appears secondarily, unbidden. This is radically different from the modern mindset, which places immediate satisfaction as a right and almost an obligation. The result of that mindset is a constant void. No matter how much is obtained, more is always wanted. Mental exercise, imagined loss. Imagine for a moment that today you lose your physical capacity to experience sexual pleasure. What would be left to you? Would you have deep relationships that could stand without it? Would you still feel appreciation for your partner or for yourself? Would you have projects, passions, or skills to fill that space? This exercise, though uncomfortable, is a direct test of your level of dependence. If, when you think about it, you feel your life would be empty, it is a sign that pleasure has taken too much protagonism. The Stoics practiced this kind of negative visualization, premeditatio malorum, to strengthen their resilience and to remember that what is external, even the most enjoyable, is always transitory. Pleasure under command. When pleasure is under your command, you can choose when and how to experience it without letting it divert you from your goals. This does not mean living in repression, but in awareness. You can enjoy it fully when it occurs, but without the need to chase it compulsively. In fact, pleasure lived this way becomes more intense and satisfying because it does not come with guilt, emptiness, or anxiety to repeat it. A change in definition. Instead of defining pleasure as what makes me feel good now, start seeing it as what leaves me at peace afterward. It is a subtle but powerful shift. Many experiences that seem pleasurable in the moment leave us restless, regretful, or unsatisfied afterward. True Stoic pleasure is that which, even after time passes, still feels good to have lived. Practice conclusion. Redefining pleasure is not removing it from your life, but returning it to its right place, a companion, not a captain. When you achieve this, you reclaim a freedom few know. To enjoy without depending, and to say no without feeling you are losing something. Here is the final revelation. True freedom is not having sex, but not needing it to feel whole. It is not about eliminating something from your life, but about taking away its power to decide for you. All the practices we have seen form a path. First, self-control, so you stop acting on impulse. Then the energy that used to scatter in 1,000 directions begins to concentrate. Energy for your projects, for your body, for your mind. With more energy comes clarity. You begin to see your relationships more sharply, without the fog of immediate desire. And that clarity allows you to build purer, more conscious relationships where connection does not depend only on the physical, but on the emotional, the intellectual, and the spiritual. At this point, pleasure ceases to be a master that drags you along and becomes a guest whom you choose when to receive. You no longer move out of lack, but out of choice. The captain metaphor. Imagine your life as a ship in the middle of the sea. Most people are passengers. They get on, the current carries them, sometimes to beautiful places, sometimes to dangerous waters, but they never choose the course. Practicing self-control over your impulses is like taking the helm. You choose where to go, when to stop, and when to change course. The current, desires will always be there, but now it is not what commands. You are the captain. That is the essence of Stoicism. Not to extinguish passions, but to direct them. Not to flee from pleasure, but to put it at the service of your life, not the other way around. The moment you no longer need something to feel good, you discover you can enjoy it more and more authentically. And best of all, if it is not present, your peace remains intact. I want you to remember this. Control over your impulses is control over your life. There is no greater freedom than being able to say yes or no without your body, your emotions, or others' expectations deciding for you. That is the basis of any personal victory, the capacity to govern yourself. Today I propose a simple yet powerful challenge. 7 days of conscious abstinence. It is not repression, it is not punishment. It is an opportunity to observe yourself. For 1 week, commit to not deliberately seeking sexual stimuli and to avoid intimate relations. Use those 7 days as a personal laboratory. In that time, pay attention to 3 things. Your focus. Do you find it easier to concentrate on important tasks? Your energy. Do you notice more physical and mental vitality throughout the day? Your emotional state. Do you feel calmer, less reactive? Do not underestimate this exercise. At the end of the week, you will not only have answers about how desire influences you, but you will also have proved something fundamental, that you can take the helm when you decide to. The Stoics did not measure their strength by their ability to fight others, but by their ability to master themselves. That mastery does not make you cold or distant, but free. Free to love without depending, to enjoy without slavery, to choose without fear. And now I want to hear from you. Comment below. What habit can you change today to gain more self-control? Perhaps it is not this 7-day challenge. Perhaps it is sleeping better, eating more mindfully, or spending less time on social media. Whatever it is, put it in writing. Sharing it not only commits you to yourself, it also inspires others to begin their own path toward personal mastery. Remember, it is not about fleeing from pleasure, but about putting it under your command. Because when you control your impulses, you control your destiny.